Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is Marianne-pestana, and we're here today with special guest, Dr. Sharon Prentice, and she's here to share with us her new book, Becoming Starlight, a shared-death-journey from darkness to light. Sharon is a psychotherapist and spiritual counselor whose work focuses on helping people process the grief and loss of a loved one. She had a unique spiritual experience known as shared-death experience, which gave her a peek into forgiveness and a sense of peace that was otherworldly. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Sharon Prentice.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm so thankful to be here speaking with you.
Oh my goodness, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. So why did you feel like now was the right time to write this book?
Oh my goodness, it was one of those things where I had to be pushed, literally. I had to be pushed into writing this because it was such a vulnerable journey for me, a long, vulnerable journey, a lot of heartache, a lot of grief, a lot of selfishness, a lot of all those things that people don't want to share with the world. And when you put these, walls around you to protect you, it's hard to let them down. But a couple of things happen. The universe just comes in and kicks you in the butt. Wayne Dyer, for one, a mentor of mine, says, you have got to write this book. You've got to write this story. And that on top of my patients. I deal a lot with terminally ill patients and their families. And there's always a moment in their journey, their death journey, where I am asked, should I be afraid? And that is the moment when I say to them, let me tell you my story. And so what happened was all of them would say to me, please write this down. Because when we're not with you, we want to be able to go back and read it and remember it and feel it all over again. So actually, those two things were the impetus for me finally saying, okay. I'll be vulnerable enough to do this. And Wayne said to me, write the story. Don't leave anything out. Write the story. So that's what I did.
Well, you did a beautiful job on that. My goodness, it was very heartbreaking because you went through two very traumatic losses that I think a lot of people would never recover from.
Oh, boy. Responding to that, number one, that's very true. A lot of people don't recover. I owed my recovery really to two things. First loss was my daughter. She was born right after, she died right after she was born. And what saved my life, literally, was my dad. My dad was my absolute rock, and he just pushed the world out of the way. And he stayed inside the walls with me that I put up to protect myself. If it hadn't been for my father, I would have probably just laid down and died myself because that's what I wanted to do. And for 9 years, I kind of lived that way because I was also dealing with my husband's illness. And when he died, that's what this book is about. It was that experience that set me back on the path to living.
For a lot of people, they would get to that and go, gosh, okay, they'd be so immersed in grief and sorrow, it would be just impossible to get out. How did you move beyond that?
It was the experience with my husband when he died. And what's really funny is that I didn't do anything to move me beyond that grief. It was the experience. It was the shared death experience that I had when he died. This was an experience given to me. I call it a peek into foreverness. It's like a near-death experience, only the person having the shared death experience is alive and well, and most oftentimes at the bedside, the person that had died. But being shown everything that I was shown when he died, all of that momentary grief of his death that and the anger and the rage and the control issues and all of that stuff was just taken away from me, because showing me, this is going to sound very strange, showing me that he still existed made it fine. It made it okay that he wasn't going to be physically there with me. That was the initial enabler, if I want to use that word, to get me past wanting to just, dig my own grave and crawl into it.
It's interesting how belief systems can kind of fuel some of that disconnect.
Right.
And is that what you experienced as well?
Here's a funny thing about belief systems. I was raised Southern Baptist. This is what gets people really mad at me. I was raised Southern Baptist, church Wednesday night, Sunday nights, the whole thing. And I always was told, do the right thing, be a good little girl, don't swear, don't do this. You know the routine and the dogma. And I always lived by that. But then when my daughter was born and she lay on my chest dying, and I reached out to this God that I had been taught loved me. Okay, this God that was there with me all the time, that was going to take care of me, and nothing bad was going to happen because I followed all the rules. And when she died, I realized that God that I had been told about did not exist. And if I'm using he because it's easy to talk about, if he did exist, then he had to be the most evil, just rotten entity in the entire universe to take the life of a child. So I spent the next 9 years after her death, and then watching my husband go through what he was going through, absolutely hating anything to do with organized religion or God or anything that even smacked of any type of spiritual reasoning. It was me against death, me against whatever God entity there was. And I fought it like you wouldn't believe. So the fact that I was given this spiritual experience when my husband died, I went into that with absolutely no faith or spirituality in anything. So being given this was a very strange phenomenon.
A lot of times you hear people that say, well, I don't know if I'm going to go to heaven because
Right.
I haven't done everything right this lifetime, and they develop such great fear.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that?
Actually, I think that's kind of, I'm not going to say silly, okay, because that's what organized religion does to people. It did it to me. But what I found in that shared death experience was nothing at all like what organized religion had been teaching me my whole life, that there's this place called heaven and this place called hell, and that if you do everything right, you are assured that you are going to be in heaven, okay, on this particular street in this particular mansion, with all the diamonds and the pearls and all that good stuff, or you're going to burn in hell for eternity. That is nothing like what I found. It was the total opposite. In the book, when I describe where I went, I don't call it heaven. I call it that place, because I didn't really have a name for it. I just knew I'd been there before. I called it home. I said it felt like I knew exactly where I was. I had been there before. And that place was nothing but love. I know that sounds so trite. And so you hear people all the time talking about, oh, it's all love. There was nothing there except total compassion and love and understanding and the magnificence of all of that. I've never been able to find a word for that. When I talked to Raymond Moody about it, that's one of the things that he said that he understands totally, is that some things are so beyond human language, and to try and give it a word, to try and give it a location, diminishes the entire thing, because our human existence here, we can't do it because it exists beyond our wildest imaginings behind our wildest dreams. So the dogma that you get from organized religion, as I call it, I think that does such harm because it really misses the mark of what this world is all about, what we're all about.
Yeah. How really things work, maybe work on the other side. It's interesting. I would think that people that have a belief, system in church and God, which is, everyone's belief system's their belief system. They probably experience that on the other side, as far as, because it's all according to what they're believing.
Some people actually say that. I'm not so sure about that because I've been with so many people as they've laid dying. And, there are people confuse the moment of death with the process of dying. And during that process, so many things happen that can be vocalized. Lisa Smart has a book out called Words at the Threshold, which is an amazing, amazing book where she got very interested in that process of dying and the things that people were saying, the things that people were seeing during that process. And she started actually writing it down. And what she was finding is that so many of the things that the people believed in here, the downloads and the documents and the dogma and all of that they were given their whole lives, it changes during that process. So sometimes I really honestly wonder, especially with me going through what I went through, I wonder when you actually reach that point in your survival, because that's what it is. We survive this death. We survive this. To me, it's like birth backwards. Okay. Death is just birth backwards. And when we get to where we're going, it's like, oh, I knew this. Why did I forget this? And the truth of our existence here as spiritual beings. That is what comes through. I read this quote the other day. It was by, I can't remember his name, Marcus Aurelius, I think. Then he says that we are little spirits carrying around a human corpse. Isn't that great?
Oh my gosh.
That
is very interesting.
It was. I absolutely love that because, well, I was ready to hear that too, And when we get past this particular boundary, this life boundary, this thing that we call our life here on this earth, when we pass that and it all is opened to us and we remember who we really truly are, all of that other stuff just goes away. And it's such a limiting time here. It really is. So I just wonder, I really do. I wonder what people find for themselves on the other side when they have been so entrenched, in the dogma that they get from their particular religious, boundaries. I just call them boundaries because that's what they are.
You share something, and we talked about this earlier, that was new to me. And I'd like for you to share, you talk about shared death experience.
Right.
So what is that?
Oh, I had no earthly idea what it was until it happened to me. And I had to reach out to Raymond to find out what in the world happened to me. Everybody knows what a near-death experience is. You kind of have to be living under a rock to not know that. A shared death experience is identical in 99% of the ways of a near-death experience, except for one huge difference. The person having that experience is alive and well. Most times they're right next to the person who is dying, but there are people who have been on the other side of the world and had these experiences with someone that they love as they lay dying. For me, at the moment of Steve's death, I just collapsed, because I had set up this existential battle with death and with God, and my control issues were totally off the chart. And I figured if I was able to control everything, then he would live. And at the moment of his death, I realized I really wasn't in control of anything. And I just collapsed. And at that moment, the floor that I was standing on started to disappear, even though I knew I was standing on it. and the ceiling started turning very misty, even though I knew it was there. I was in a hospital room, my oncologist was there and my parents were there, and I could see them, and I could see them coming toward me because they were thinking something was wrong with me. And I could hear my oncologist saying certain things about me. At the same time, he was trying to, take care of Steve, who had just died. And the interesting thing is, in the room I was in, there was a picture window on one side of the room. And I had turned my body. I have often said that all of these things happened to me, my movement, everything happened to me by some force that was powering my body, because it most certainly wasn't me. And I started looking out the window, and the only thing I saw was stars, just billions and billions and billions of stars. And they were filling the room. Just everything in the room was becoming stars. That's why the book's called Becoming Starlight, because I walked into that starlight, or that starlight walked into me. I don't know which one it is, but I did not know where starlight ended, where I began. And, it was all one big star. And I became part of that. And I went into it so freely and so joyfully, even though my husband lay behind me on a bed dead. I walked into that absolutely filled with joy, because I felt a presence in there. And I knew the presence. I knew it. I couldn't name it, but I knew it. And it was waiting for me, and open arms, and it just grabbed me. And I have said that it cocooned me. And the love that I felt in that place was so incredibly magnificent and so all-encompassing. Those are the only words that I can really use for it, because it was nothing like I had ever felt, except when I say I knew that place. I remembered it from something. And it was so amazing. And I was held there. I wasn't allowed, and I use that word allowed because I wasn't allowed to move from that cocoon that had me wrapped. And a few things happened in there that changed my life. One of which was I saw my husband. He was standing there in front of me, and he was smiling, and he looked like him. The final diagnosis for him was pancreatic cancer. And anyone that knows what pancreatic cancer, or any cancers really for that matter, do to people, he was a big man. He was 6'4" and 200 and something pounds. And when he died, he didn't even weigh 99 pounds. And yet here he was standing in front of me, looking gorgeous and beautiful. And his almond-shaped eyes were just smiling at me. And he was well, and he was happy. And I was well, and I was happy. And there was no need to say goodbye. And the world was exactly the way it was supposed to be. Now, I also knew at that moment that he was going someplace else where I was not allowed to go. And I knew I wasn't allowed to go there because I was told I have no place there. In other words, it wasn't my time. That's the way I took it. And I knew he was going to be with our daughter. And when he disappeared, it was so funny because I didn't even feel the need to say goodbye. I knew he was okay, and I knew where he was going, and I knew I was going to be okay. I don't know how long I was actually held in that place. What I do know is that by the time I'm going to use the words, came back, my oncologist was still there with me, and he had taken my blood pressure and all that other stuff because my blood pressure dropped down to practically nothing. And everybody was afraid for me. They thought I was having a heart attack or something, but I wasn't. And when I looked at the clock, it was 45 minutes from the time Steve had died to when I was fully aware of where I was. And then began my hunt, my search for that one star. The stars had gone back into the sky. I was no longer Starlight. And I began looking for that one little starlight where I could say, come back and get me, because I wanted to go back. But the shared death experience, if you talk to anyone who's had a near-death experience, they will tell you about the rooms changing and their consciousness changing and the environment changing and all of that. But they had the ones who were near death or did die. Where in a shared death experience, it was like me. I was fine. It was someone that I loved that had died. That's the only difference.
Yeah, you were able to see something that you probably normally wouldn't be able to see.
Right.
Just being do you feel that happened because you both were so deeply connected?
My answer to that has people either cracking up out loud or looking at me like I've lost my mind. I actually think it happened for two reasons. And all of them have the same basis, in fact. When Stephanie died, like I said, I was so full of rage, just so full of rage. And I took every opportunity to, I'm going to use the word trash, anything that had to do with God or religion or people's faith. I made fun of people, Marianne. I was horrible. I made fun of people who believed in a benevolent and kind, loving God. I made fun of them. And the other things I used to say, it was just so horrible. Anyway, 9 years of that. And when Steve died, it was so horrible. And he knew, I think Steve actually knew I was not going to survive this. It was too much, his death on top of Stephanie's death and all the rage that I felt for so long. But I think when he got to where he was going, he said, all right, God, you got to throw this woman a bone. She is not going to survive this. You got to give her something. And I think, and I'm using the word God, you can call it source, universe, whatever you want. I call it God. I think God finally came to me and he's like, okay, I've had enough of you. I want you to see what this is about. And I honestly believe that's why I was given this experience. I am not this angelic, spiritual, faith-filled person at the time. I just wasn't. But I really believe those two things, Steve thinking that I wasn't going to survive it, and the universe having enough of me and my rage toward all of this, that I was like, okay, come on. Let me give you a peek into what's really going on here. So I think that's the reason. I really do. And I laugh about it still, but I swear I think that's the reason.
Well, I'll go with you on that because I think a lot of people in that situation would feel the same way. They kind of like, oh, I'm so angry. This is happening. Forget it. And to have this experience really makes a massive shift.
It did.
Oh my gosh. So how did the shift work for you afterwards? I mean, there's so much that's happening. How did you view life after all this?
This is going to sound, this got me in trouble with my in-laws. It really did. The day after my husband died, now remember, we're talking Southern Baptist. The day after my husband died, you know what I was doing? I went out bike riding. I had a little boy. I didn't want him going through everything that I knew the family was planning. And I took him bike riding. I told my parents, take care of what needs taken care of, that Steve was okay. I knew he was fine. I knew where he was. And I was not about to put my little boy through what I knew the church and the rest of the family was going to put him through. I saw my life and I saw my son's life through a totally different lens. It was a knowing. People ask me now, do you believe in God? And I say, no. You know why? Because I know him. There's a difference between thinking something, believing something, and knowing something. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt who I am and where I come from. I know that. So the change that came about, I didn't have to struggle with faith anymore. I didn't have to struggle with believing something that I couldn't touch. A lot of people have trouble if they can't touch it. They're not going to, believe it and say, well, what about love? You can't touch that, blah, blah, blah. But you can see it in people's actions. And being given this experience took me from the struggle of belief and the struggle from having faith, it took me to a knowing that changed absolutely everything about my life. What I do now, people get kind of, oh my gosh, what you do now is based on the worst moment of your life. True. What I do now is based on the death of my daughter and the death of my husband. And those were the two worst things that could ever happen to anyone. I wouldn't wish this on my absolute worst enemy, but it was also the best moment in my life because I was given this knowing that in my book is my truth. And that's why I do what I do now, so that I can try to give this knowing to people who are afraid when death comes knocking at their door, oftentimes not in the manner in which we expect it. You know, there's a death order that people expect. You know, your grandparents, your parents, blah, blah, blah. And when death comes knocking for your child or your spouse or, you know, out of order, faith dies, belief dies, just like it did with me, because it wasn't real. It wasn't a knowing. And that's why I do what I do. I try to bring that knowing to people to alleviate their fear. And then I work with the families afterwards, because I insist, that's one of the things I insist, is that during those moments of the transition, I want as many of the families there as possible so they can see it and witness it and hear it. That's so important, because that changes your faith and your belief into knowing.
Yeah, when you have that knowing, it's like your soul recognizes,
Yes.
hey, this is true. And or I've been here before. I recognize this.
Yes.
And all of us have that.
We do. But we so limit ourselves by family tradition and by labels and really by fear. You know, we are so fearful to step out of those things that are expected of us. You know, when we're born, we know, of course, we're given our names, but we're also given our religion, and we're given our careers, and we're given who we're going to like and who we're not going to like. And we're given all of these things by people that they don't care. It's not that they don't care. I take that back. It's they are doing to us what was done to them. This is a traditional thing. And we are so afraid to step out of that. And what people don't understand is that looking eyeball to eyeball, okay, with the fear and naming that fear, that's where the knowing comes. And that's where your strength comes. And that's where your resilience comes in. And that's where all the potential of your life is. It's right behind that fear. People are afraid of fear. Does that make, you know, I know it's kind of a weird sentence there, but being afraid of fear is what stops people from the knowing that they absolutely need to have to live the life and really use the gifts that they were given even before they were born.
I know you talk about in your book how you really had this renewal when you were within God's presence.
Yes.
And it's interesting. I think a lot of times when people hear, well, everything was love, they kind of get confused that it could also be God.
You know, if you ask me now, I will definitely say to you that I was in God's hands. There's no doubt in my mind that crossing into that starlight, I crossed from this physical, whatever you want to call it, into the reality of the way things really are. And I was absolutely in God's hands. And I have to tell you, my heart really aches for people who believe in a vengeful God. We are taught that, but I honestly, once again, I go back to organized religion, and this, like I said, this causes a lot of haters to come out. Organized religion to me is more about power and control than it is anything else, because there was not one iota of vengeance. There's also a chapter in the book that I talk about my definition of God. And it's like, welcome home. Tell me about your day. You know, you can be muddy and dirty and God knows what. Okay. And so what? It's tell me about your day, honey. How'd your day go? There's no vengeance. and people who are afraid to go to the love that is waiting for them. I find that one of the most sorrowful things in life, because people are missing out on knowing who they are and why they're here. You know, I tell people all the time, you're here because you are a thought of God. It's like one day he says, you know what, I really want to show this part of myself to the world. Zap, here's Marianne. Okay. You are that reflection. You are God's presence right here. And if you are afraid of God, if you have that fear, that all this vengeance, you know, I called it the Charlton Heston, you know, in the Ten Commandments, throwing the, you know, lightning bolts. A lot of people think of God that way. That is the image. That is so far from the truth. You know, the image is the loving, loving, loving presence that wants nothing but that thought of him that you express in the world. And I say to people sometimes, vengeance and sending you to eternal fire and hell and damnation. Why? Why? It makes no sense. It is a total lack. It is a waste of godly energy and presence. You know, you're not going to condemn yourself for the thought that you gave of yourself to someone to express here in this world.
The insights that you have, I mean, I know you do hospice work. How has that affected your work?
That is one of the absolute best things I have ever done. I don't, if it is in my power, and oftentimes it is, but sometimes it's not, I don't let anyone die alone. I do not let my people die alone. I like to be with them. It's very important to me to be holding someone, to let them know that they loved well and that they are loved well. And if I can do anything to take the fear away, fear is a big thing with me. If I can do anything to take the fear away and to let them know how loved they are. And you get that in hospice, because hospice is a totally different animal. Let me tell you, there's no pretense. Okay. In hospitals, there's pretense. Unless, of course, you're in the waiting room, in the emergency room, then pretense starts to die, because that's where the real conversations take place. But in hospice, even in the waiting room, the conversation is death. What are we going to do? Where's mom going? What's going to happen to my daughter? Why is this happening? What are we going to do? How are we going to survive this? What's really out there? Is she really going to be gone? Do we stop existing? Those are the conversations. And I am so blessed and so fortunate to be able to be part of those conversations. And it's not me, okay? It's the experience that I was given that allows me to do these things. Because before that experience, no way. No way. Wouldn't have happened. But now I know the questions. You know, this is sort of a been there, done that, got the t-shirt thing. Okay. And
Yeah.
being able to share that with people. It is, hospice is, like I said, it's a different animal. Walking through that door takes you right into the very presence of love. It really does. And there, yes, there's pain, and yes, there's heartache and grief, so deep and desperate. But the love that is there in every single room, in the hallways, and the nurses there are the angels of the whole entire place, because they hold it down. You know, you want to talk about what happens in a hospice? Talk to a hospice nurse. They'll tell you.
And some of these discussions I think would be good for us to have now. I know you talk about how important it is that we start discussing death, you know, and
Yes.
why is that? Why do you feel that?
Because we don't talk about it. Our society, especially, we don't talk about it. We're afraid of it. No one wants to think that they're mortal. No one. You know, I remember that moment like it was yesterday. I thought when Stephanie died that I knew what I needed to know. Okay, I really did. I thought I knew about death. I thought I knew about everything, but I didn't. What I learned about then was fear. Okay. And I didn't want to look at the fear. I didn't have time to look at the fear because, my husband was getting sick at the same time. And so I hid it away, didn't want to touch it, turned the fear into anger, which a lot of people do. They just don't realize it. Nobody would talk to me about what happened. I made the worst jokes sometimes trying to reach out, but I said things like, "Oh yeah, I'm a platinum member of the Dead Kids Club," of the moms of the dead. Oh, it was horrible. Trying to get some type of a reaction. Nothing. No one wanted to talk to me about it because not only was a death out of order, but the fear, especially from other parents, okay, the fear that could happen to their child. Nobody even wanted to be around me. And it wasn't because I had turned into this rageful person. It was because I reminded them that these things are possible. So you lose all kinds of people in your life, okay, because we don't talk about death. And then while Steve was dying, you get you got this. It's going to be okay. The doctors are going to take care of it. Everything's going to be fine. And, there's a big difference between prolonging life and prolonging death. Our conversations in this society are all about prolonging life because we don't want to admit our mortality. When that moment comes, when you realize, and mine came sitting in the oncologist's office when he was talking to us about Steve's impending death. All of a sudden, I was like, this can happen again. This is going to happen again. I remember I kicked my shoes off. He had a big Chinese carpet in his room. And everything he was saying to me was blah, blah, blah. Okay, I didn't even hear the words anymore. And I didn't have my shoes on. And I remember putting my toes down into the carpet because I spotted one bright blue thread in the lighter blue of the carpet. And I remember seeing a plant behind his desk that he hadn't watered and it was dead. And I remember thinking, wow, this is who we are. We can die. That moment when you realize that you're mortal scares the living bejesus out of you. It really does. We don't know how to talk about that. So when it actually happens to someone that you love, it's bad enough when it happens to you, okay? Because you can tell yourself all kinds of, you can lie to yourself and protect yourself and do all kinds of things. That's bad enough. But when death comes for someone that you love, good God, the fact that we are so ill-equipped. I was ill-equipped. Nobody ever talked to me about death. It wasn't supposed to happen. No one in my life, even my grandparents, nobody had died. You don't start with your daughter. But I did. I had zero clue how to handle death. Zero. And most people that you talk to today, they have no idea how to handle it because we don't talk about it, except in hushed tones, in emergency rooms and hospices and things like that, because that is when it hits us in the face that death is possible. I think it's not a good thing that we do in our society. It's really not.
No, I think we do ourselves a disservice by not having discussions about that.
Yeah.
Because it is a threshold we will all face one day.
Sure we will. And it's surrounded by, once again, that word fear. It's so surrounded and it's darkened, it's this fear factor that we don't want to look into because it's like, oh my God, I didn't do this. I didn't do that. I'm going to go to hell. I wasn't good enough. Am I going to totally not exist anymore? Am I just going to disappear? What's going to, how does this happen? All of these questions that nobody wants to look at, because the only thing most people have to go back to, thank God that is changing, but one of the things that most people have to go back to is what they learned sitting in a pew, listening to some minister talking about death and heaven and hell. And it's scary. Thank God that's starting to change. But as long as it is shrouded in shadow and we are afraid to look at it. I mean, no one wants to talk about death every day. Nobody. Okay. It's scary and it's painful and it's full of all of those questions that there aren't any answers to. But I think a basic understanding of who we really are on this earth. That's why I like that quote so much. Little spiritual things carrying around a human corpse. I read that and I'm like, oh my God, that is so cool. It's if people really just think about this, Marianne. If people understood what they meant, think about how their lives would change. Think about how the world would change. So much hatred and anger and stuff would just disappear. I really believe that.
I think that we would look at the world in such a different way,
Yeah.
have such a different perception of it.
Yeah.
But I know when people are deep in their grief,
Yeah.
it's really tough. And I know you talk about how finding a way to gratitude, how important that is.
That is, one of the hardest things for me. I can't. And a lot of the people I've talked to have had the near-death experience. You want to stay in that place. We're not meant to stay in that place. We're human. We are just as divine as we are human, but our humanity has to lead the way sometimes when you're on this earth, okay, just to survive. And so we're not meant to live in that state of magnificence. And so we kind of lose it, And so when the grief and all of those things hit you, it's very easy to fall back and start asking those questions again. And for me, switching from, wow, losing a daughter, losing a husband, oh my God, how horrible. Switching from that, just the gratitude that they spent their lives with me. I thought about that with Stephanie. Gary Zukav, who I absolutely love, made a statement one time that he said, just think about this, that beautiful little soul, for the hour she was here, she chose you to spend that hour with. She chose you to be her mom, her soul, her physical being, everything about her, of all of the souls in the universe. She chose to spend her short time with me. Good God. When I think about it that way, it just makes my heart just jump. I mean, it really does, even to this day. When I think about that, the amount of love that she gave me in that short period of time, she chose me. How can I negate that by being angry and rageful and hateful? That denies her existence. That denies her entire existence. But my being able to switch that to feeling just the love that she gave me and the gratitude that she chose me, that still just leaves me absolutely speechless, just speechless. And I try to do that with everything in my life. My son is grown now and I have grandchildren and I look at them and just what I feel for them. Such love and such gratitude for the life that I have been given. And I can't help but wonder, would I be able to feel all the things that I feel now if these terrible, terrible events had not happened to me? To say that their deaths were the reason for my being able to feel this way, I've never been able to get to that, okay? But is that a possibility? That I needed some major waking up because I wasn't listening to the whispers? I don't know. The soul wounds, the fractures, I call them soul fractures that people have all through their life. Those are the things. Those are the things that are important. And those are the things that you need to share with people. And those are the things that wake you up to who you really are and what you should be putting out into this universe. I don't necessarily say all things happen for a reason, But I don't say that's not true either. I struggle with that all the time.
Well, I can understand. I mean, it's very much a process.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like, oh, I've arrived. Okay, we're good. Let's go.
Yeah,
It's
no.
just a process. And I think it's encouraging for people to hear that, because you often hear people say, oh, that person's passed. It's been a couple weeks. They should be fine.
Oh, gosh.
Or a couple months, or it's been a year,
No.
Yeah, it's all these expectations that
Yeah.
don't even fit anything.
Grief journeys are one of those things that I tell people to take all the time you need. I don't care if it takes you a week. I don't care if it takes you 30 years. Take all the time you need. I never tell people to look for closure, ever. Closure is one of those, I believe, one of those psychological myths, because when you say closure, you are talking about something that is a implied consent. Okay. It is a real, okay, I'm over this. There are some things people never get over. I talk about incorporating that grief, making it part of you, growing with it. Story I tell, I don't know if we have time for this, but there's a story I tell about a tree in Harper's Ferry. This is actually true. I have a picture of that tree. Long time ago, there was a flood, like 100 and something years ago. There was this flood in Harper's Ferry, took down everything. I mean, the trees, the hills, the houses, everything. And there was one tree there, just a couple years old, pretty big tree. And it was right next to this orphanage that was made out of stone and brick. And, the orphanage got destroyed. And this huge piece of mortared stone brick fell down onto this tree. Everybody thought the tree was going to die. They actually were going to cut it down, but they had so much other work to do that they left the tree alone. That tree is still standing today, 100 years later. I've got a picture of it. What happened was the stone is still in that tree. Massive stone is still in that tree. But the tree survived by encompassing, just surrounding and encompassing that stone, made it part of itself. And it grew and grew and grew. And it is one of the most gorgeous trees. My brother-in-law was a ranger at Harper's Ferry, and he would tell the story, and he would take people to see this tree. And this is what I tell people. You have to be able to take these horrible, soul-shattering moments. You can't try and get rid of them. Why would I want to bring closure to two of the most important people in my life? Why would I want to close that moment out? Why would I want to close that love and that grief and that all of those feelings? I don't want to close them out. I want to incorporate them into my very soul and make them part of me, because that is how I became who I am today. That's what I tell people.
Well, it makes such an impact, all the things that we go through and all the things that we experience that bring us to the place we are today.
Yeah.
And I think you've had such a remarkable gift in many ways with having that shared death experience and being able to look back on that. It must provide you a lot of comfort.
It really does. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are days when God and I have this ongoing conversation where I'm like, you know what, dude, you and I, we just so got to talk about this death thing. I mean, it's just, you did something wrong here. I mean, I seriously have these conversations where I still, it doesn't ever really go away. I still get angry when I think about what could have been. And that is just an imagining in my mind. Okay. I wrote this article for, I think it was Standing Still. It was either Standing Still magazine or Compassionate Friends, where I named it, We Meet in Our Dreams, where I built this entire life with my daughter from the time she was little to the time I died. All the things that you would think you would do with your daughter, combing her hair and going to the playground and, getting mad at her for this or that, or then comes the first boyfriend and the prom and the wedding and and I started it with me combing her hair when she was a baby and ending it with her combing my hair as I lay dying. And those are the things that I think I struggle with the most, is the what may have been. But then I look at what I have now, and those may have beens give me such gratitude because I'm doing them now. No, I'm not doing them with her, but I'm doing them with part of her because they're part of me.
Dr. Prentice, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. Again, if you'd like to connect with Sharon Prentice, you can at sharonprentice.com for more information. Becoming Starlight's available everywhere books are sold, and remember, support our indie bookstores. Are you looking for more information on this book or perhaps inspiration for your next great read? Visit moments-with-marianna.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianna.com for more information.